All right, so my task is really easy now. I get to pinch hit for the speaker that was originally promoted. I get to spend the next 20 minutes and try and make everything from smart grid to ERCOT resource adequacy to forward price risk management and boil all that down in a way that makes sense to you guys as a group of end users and still get you out to the golf course and to lunch on time. No problem. Viridity, this is very brief because many of you probably have not heard of Viridity before. We're new to Texas. We're in our 4th year as a company. We are not a CSP. We do deal with demand response programs. We deal very heavily with helping end users manage demand, but we are not a typical or traditional curtailment services provider. The purpose of our software as a technology company, wow, okay, we just started echoing more, is to really try and translate the complexity of the energy markets, the things that you've heard today from the various speakers, and boil it down into something that creates actionable information for you as an end user so that you can take a simple look at a dollar value that allows you to make a business determination about what makes sense for you and your load and your particular energy envelope and environment. We're partnering with GDF Suez as a way to create wholesale type access to the market that will allow you to monetize whatever flexibility we help you find in your load. And I get excited about this because it's sort of the culmination of close to 3 decades of involvement on my part in the energy markets and being able to help end users take control, manage load, manage their exposure to the forward marketplace, and be able to use the tools that are available to you to actually lower your energy costs. And we're going to try and talk about all of that in the next now 17 minutes. So a lot of changes have taken place over my time in the energy industry. Probably one of the bigger ones recently certainly is the introduction of the term smart grid. And we've all heard about the smart grid, and we've all heard all this, there's billions and billions of dollars out there chasing smart grid activity. And so I thought, well, gee, it's probably a good idea if I figure out what the smart grid is. So I decided I would become a smart grid expert. And to do that, I engaged in exhaustive research over the past few years and came across a variety of resources that helped me begin to understand. I found a picture just recently, this was literally in the last few weeks. Everybody's starting to get a better handle on it now. And this makes it all clear, I think, to everyone. This was a consultant that put this together. And it basically what it says is there are scads of companies, all of whom are clamoring to try and get a piece of this market, and many of whom are focused on how do we help the end user benefit from the smart grid. I also went to Distributech, which is an industry trade conference that takes place every spring pretty much. And while there, my old consulting firm did a survey of participants at Distributech, which was kind of the epicenter of the smart grid universe, if you will, and looked at their perceptions around a variety of issues. And I found this slide to be pretty interesting. When we looked at what are the most compelling reasons for commercial and industrial end users to change behavior, the perception of the participants in this conference where the primary driver would be volatility and changes in pricing and dynamic pricing available to end users. You'll notice that it significantly outstrips the concept of demand response programs. Now, I found that interesting because it tells me that the perception in the marketplace across all industry players is that end users are ready to step up and take control over what they're doing and be willing to participate in the market from a price responsive basis as opposed to a program responsive basis. Now, it'll be interesting to get people's feedback in this room, since this is the end user community, as to whether you feel like you're in the same place that the rest of the industry wants you to be in. So the way I look at all of this is that smart grid is an interesting concept, and it is going to bring some new tools to us, and that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, we all exist in the energy business because of the end user. It's providing power to you in a way that allows you to manage your exposure and run your business in a way that makes sense for you. So what I want to try and do today is take all of this complexity around smart grid deregulation, SCED this, SCED that, ERCOT this, ERCOT that, resource adequacy, and try and boil it down to something that you guys can actually do when you walk away from here and say, I'm now in a better position to be able to manage my exposure and my participation in the energy market. And we're going to do that just by focusing on controlling costs on the energy side. So I'm going to skip a lot of the history, which is how I'm going to condense my 30 minutes to 20 minutes. And you know, when I look around the room, I see probably, don't take this wrong, but I see many of you have probably traveled the same path I have. You've been in the business long enough, you've seen a lot of these changes. But some of the key things that have occurred were the development of the wholesale market. And along with the development of the wholesale market on the physical side came a financial market. And with the financial market came certain tools. And over time, those tools have taken on various connotations. Sometimes they're good things. Gee, I can get a fixed price that allows me to hedge my forward price exposure to natural gas or to power, and that's a great thing. But don't tell me that you're using a derivative to be able to do it, because derivatives are bad. We all learned that. So we're not talking about derivatives, but we are going to talk about financial structures of ways to put together solutions for you at the price control, from a price control perspective. So along the way, we've learned a variety of things. We have learned to spell risk management. It's not spelled E-N-R-O-N, like most people think, but that was a new concept for us that came along with the introduction of trading natural gas futures contracts financially, and ultimately with the development of the deregulation of the power industry. We've also learned to spell credit risk management. Credit became an increasingly important part of our industry. What does that mean to you as an end user? Well, obviously you don't want to be forward contracted with an REP who goes into bankruptcy and leaves you exposed on the position that you thought that you had contracted. For the REPs, for wholesale players, credit risk management has other connotations. But what we want to do is we want to use the market tools that are available to us to take control of our positions. So if that's general history, this is more specific history, and we look at the evolution of the ERCOT market. And I will not drag you through the evolution of the ERCOT market, but I will highlight just a couple of things. With the ERCOT market opening in 2002, customers were given a choice associated with their supply. No longer was I captive to the utility. No longer was I a pure price taker. Now I had the opportunity to define what it is that I wanted to do within the confines of the commodity contract. Eventually, we learned to kind of figure out what demand response is. And if I have some flexibility in my load, somebody's going to put a value on that. And ERCOT came along and provided programs, and CSPs came along and provided access to those programs. And that was great because we sort of all got free standby money. But what we didn't realize is the limitations on the control that we had under those programs. We all got introduced to that in 2011 with 20-plus hour curtailment events. So in 2012, where do we stand now? We stand at a position where we have the ability to combine tools that we've developed historically on the physical and financial side, and tools that we've been given or we have access to now through demand side management. And that's really the direction that I'm going to take with the balance of this discussion. So we have, on the end user level, and I talked to many, many end users, there are really two pieces to the world, right? You have the supply side strategy associated with how you do your procurement. And you talk to multiple suppliers and you try and create some kind of apples to apples comparison, and you try and drive your commodity price as low as you can on your contract as a way to mitigate your exposure for forward risk. And you may do that through index products, you may do it through fixed prices or blocks and indexes or various things. You also then have kind of this other side of your business activity, which I'm going to call demand side strategy. And that could be anything from energy efficiency projects to demand response program participation to meeting that long ago, nearly forgotten about press release that your CEO made following the board meeting and the annual meeting to the shareholders that says we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 20%. You guys all have that press release still posted on your desk? So sustainability goals and objectives kind of fell into this demand side activity. And I'm going to come back to that, but let's go back now to tie a couple of concepts together and look at ERCOT and the smart grid. So we've heard from Joel today, and we've heard everybody talking about resource adequacy, declining reserve margins. The ISO has the mandate to economically dispatch the resources that are available to it. And we've talked about the lack of incentives for new generation and its impact on those other issues. And we've talked about the PUCT's reaction to that, which is, well, how do we fix that problem? Let's just raise the system-wide offer cap. That'll solve the problem. To an end user, you got to look at that and say, okay, wait a minute, you just told me that my maximum price of power, if I have any real-time exposure, has just gone from $3,000 to $4,500 to $7,000 to up to $9,000 coming up. You know, is that really going to solve the problem? And the results of the smart grid odyssey that I went on to become a smart grid expert through my things that I showed you before, what it really boils down to on the end user side is that the smart grid concept and the billions of dollars being chased has a lot to do with upgrading the transmission system. But to an end user, that doesn't really mean much. What it means to you, though, is two really important things. One is that you're going to have better access to data. Once you have better access to data, you have better control over what you do with that data and how you leverage that data. And the other is access to markets. And those are both important concepts when we look at how I'm going to tie supply and demand side strategies together. So I'm going to go through this slide very quickly because I'm going to assume that people kind of understand the basic concepts of demand response and using load flexibility as an alternate means of providing generation to the grid. I just said a mouthful of really big words. Basically what it means is and I'd use the little pointer thing like you did, but my cat would probably chase it. When I use laser pointers, that's always what happens. Anyway. Everyone's concerned about the peak, right? What happens when supply and demand, or when demand is stretching supply? We see a lot of volatility. We see spot prices skyrocket, and we see everybody exposed to things. Well, if we could only provide some infusion of incremental generation at a lower cost, then we could sort of flatten out that peak. If we could reduce demand a little bit, and we flatten out that peak, we sort of eliminate the highest point of the exposure there. Well, demand response or load management does both of those things. It reduces load and it provides that load reduction as essentially the equivalent of generation. Now, Joel is probably over there going, demand isn't the equivalent of generation. Well, it is if it can be reliably provided. And so one of the problems out there for end users is how do I reliably provide load as an alternative to generation? And we're going to talk about that. In addition to the peak, though, there are other times and other periods of every day, of every hour, when there is value in flexibility. And for some of you, you may participate already in the old LAR program, now called CLR, which is really an ancillary services type program, as contracted by ERCOT on a daily basis for every hour. This is another level of demand response type activity. But beyond that, there's looking at how your load and your demand side activities, whether it's through energy efficiency projects or capital investments in cogeneration or other forms of CHP or thermal storage, how do those things affect my load profile across any given day, and how does that relate to pricing and to market pricing? And here is where Viridity sort of lives, is we like to look at things that go beyond just the peak of the problem, but look at managing things from an end user's perspective across every day and finding opportunities in the market for you to monetize the value that you're sitting on. So ERCOT provides various programs. I just touched on that. There's EILS, there's RRS, or no, the old LAR program. these exist, and I'm not going to spend much time going through these. But I will say that one of the issues that I have with them in general is that they're all programs. Programs, by their very definition, are limited in terms of what they can do. Lots of rules and restrictions. If you fit, you can play. If you don't fit, you don't play. When we look at, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah. So the problem with the program approach is that it doesn't really solve the problem. It solves part of the problem for those that can work with that and for those whose requirements neatly fit into those parameters. But when we look at demand response and providing demand as an alternative to generation to help meet declining reserve margins in ERCOT, what we have to look at in ERCOT as an experience to date is to say that this really hasn't fully worked. It hasn't fully solved the problem. We haven't fully unlocked all the access to load out there that ERCOT would like us to address. And from an end user standpoint, it really hasn't solved your problem either, which is what's the best way for me to be able to optimize or to monetize the flexibility that I may have or may be able to control because of all this new smart grid stuff. So we haven't pulled that together as an industry for you yet. And that's really what Viridity is trying to do, what Suez through working with us is trying to do, and trying to create a new service offering to extend to the customer base that begins to solve those problems. What's the problem? The end user hasn't really been provided the right tools or incentives to take full control over their load in the way that they could. And that one-size-fits-all programs don't really meet the needs of disparate end users. So let's think about this from the end user standpoint, and you guys probably heard this several years ago at similar conferences. As soon as ERCOT gave you choice, and we had the opportunity to select a supplier in Texas, like it or not, you became a market participant. Now, you guys probably know and explain this to your executive committees at your companies. They say, well, we are not an energy market participant. We're not going to trade. We're not going to do any of that stuff. That's not us. That's not our core business. Well, you heard Jeff earlier talk about the concept that making no decision is, in fact, making a decision to make no decision for the day. And the same thing exists by definition for you as an energy manager. You're very aware of it. Your executive team may not be very aware of it, but you know that every day, every hour, you have a decision to make. And you can take that decision off the table by saying, I want a fixed price, fixed volume, put it away for the next year, next 3 years, whatever it is, and I don't have to worry about it. Well, you just made a decision that you're not going to worry about it. And in many cases, that might be the right decision. What we want to do is help you look at that decision across time and say, I've made that decision, now how do I manage that decision? When Jeff decides to hit on 15 or whatever it was that he does, he's now taken a new position. And if he gets a 3, now he has to make another decision, right? When you take a fixed price, fixed volume contract and you set that away and you've got a hedge in place that works for you and your budget, that's great. But guess what? You now have another position that you can either choose to manage or you can choose to ignore. And I'm here to say that there are tools and ways out there for you to manage that position in a fashion that allows you to reduce your overall energy spend on an ongoing basis, which is really what you're all about. So there's a toolbox available to you that I'm going to talk about on the next slide as well. We have certain tools that are available to us on the supply side, and we have other tools that are available to us on the demand side. But at the end of the day, the only two things that you can control are really load and price, right? So if you have the accountability of being a market participant, we need to understand those things that you can control. You control price by interacting with Suez as your supplier and saying, help me understand what's happening with the market, where is it going, what should I do with that? You can control load only to the extent that you're allowed to based on the operational constraints that you have as a business, because you're not in the business to reduce energy load. That's not your job. Your job is making widgets or making chemicals or providing health care or whatever it is that the core business that you're in is in. So we have to figure out what can you control on the load side, and then what are your priorities on the price side. And that's typically been the two approaches for supply side strategies and demand side strategies. One focuses on what are my priorities on price, how do I get my best commodity deal. The other is how do I best get the most effective, efficient use of electricity within my facility. What I'm here to ask is, why in the world are we managing these two things separately? What's the biggest thing that drives your energy cost? Well, it's how much you use and what you pay for it. Those two things have an interdependency that we're not recognizing. So there is a coming convergence of looking at demand side strategies and supply side strategies in a much more holistic way that says, how do I take a price position, how do I take the consumption that I have, and how do I mix those up and turn them into something that actually allows me to lower my energy cost over time. So your load's your asset, the market's your price control mechanism. It's up to you as a market participant, like it or not, to optimize your asset. Now, this is not exactly new. People at the higher ranges of usage, I'll say, or consumption, have been doing this in ERCOT for the past 10 years, doing it in the wholesale markets. The 150 megawatt a day guys up and down the Houston Ship Channel have been looking at energy purchasing, energy procurement, energy strategy as asset optimization, much in the same way that a municipal authority or a utility might look at their position or a generator might look at their position. But what hasn't happened is that hasn't trickled down. The tools haven't been available. The resources aren't available. If you don't have a 150 megawatt peak load, you probably don't have an army of people and analysts trying to figure out what that peak load looks like. You have you, and you have maybe you and a couple other people on your energy team. And you look at your 30 megawatts, or you look at your 10 megawatts, or your 5 megawatts, or whatever it may be. The tools, the industry hasn't provided the tools to trickle down to allow you to do the same kinds of things that the generators do, that the 150 megawatt guys do. We need to do a better job of delivering those tools because you have the same need. You have the same exposure. You have the same opportunities that the largest, more sophisticated market participants do. So part of that is saying, how do we combine supply and demand side views of the marketplace? We want to be able to use your commodity agreement, which is the supply side strategy, to optimize the value of your ability to manage load, which is the demand side strategy. Tying those things together allows us to use that flexibility to benefit from market scarcity instead of be damaged by it. When I say be damaged by it, if you have real-time exposure in August of 2011, you understand what that means. When prices started trading around the system-wide offer cap of $3,000, you were damaged because you had real-time exposure. You paid some intervals at those kinds of costs per megawatt. In 2012, if you were renegotiating your fixed price contract, then what you talked about with the expectations of price and how that drove price on your graph, you experienced that when you renewed your fixed price contract going in, any time from February through May, as everybody was concerned about what was going to happen in the summer. That concern was reflected in the fixed prices that you paid. So market scarcity has typically been something that hurts end users. We want to turn it into something that can help an end user. The position as a load resource allows you to do a variety of things, not just look at load flexibility and think of it as an asset. If I have a 2 megawatt total load, I've got a 1 megawatt generator that I use strictly for backup, or I happen to have a cogen unit on site, or I don't have anything, but I know that I can reduce my load by taking certain actions, 15, 20%, whatever it might be. That amount of load that you can free up has value, and it has different values at different points in times. I can put it into a demand response program if I qualify, and I'll get a certain payment for that. but is that the best decision for me? So far, it's been the only decision. It's been the only alternative. Well, there are other alternatives, and those alternatives can be enabled by working with your supplier and looking at your commodity agreement and saying, how can I take this position that I have and this load flexibility that I have and turn it into something that has a net effect of lowering my energy cost over time? Those tools are now available. Those tools are here. They're in the marketplace. They're being used frequently. And as I said, in some quarters, they've been used for a decade. So we can, I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically the concept is we want to examine all of the monetization options at your disposal. Not just one or two, not just this one that I've heard about, not just this one that this guy mentioned to me. You want to look at it holistically and say, how do I control my overall exposure from both the supply and the demand side? So you say, okay, well, that all sounds good, and I know you crushed a lot of stuff into 18 minutes now. Tell me more about what that means to me. How do I do that? Well, unfortunately, there's no simple answer. Each end user is different, and each answer is different for each end user. There's no real good way, as Joel knows, trying to, as a representative of ERCOT, trying to design demand response programs that work for end users. Gee, the 10-minute program doesn't work that well, let's do a 30-minute pilot. Okay, well, that helps, that picks up some people. But what if that doesn't meet my needs? Okay, so how do you customize an approach to the market that works for you and your individual constraints as an end user who's stuck as an energy participant but isn't in the core business of the energy industry? The common thread is the willingness to explore the art of the possible. And what that means is understanding, working with somebody who can help bridge these gaps. In this case, for most of you in this room who are customers of Suez, you already have that avenue and that channel. And sit down with them and say, how do I look at this? How do I do this better? I kind of understand how to do the whole procurement thing, and I kind of understand how to evaluate energy efficiency projects. We've been through that before. But how do I put these pieces together into a way that's new? And it allows me to do that next incremental piece of taking control over my energy costs. So you have to have the willingness to do it, and you want to let them use the tools to find the right answers for your business. I'm not going to go through these examples necessarily. Just to give you an idea, though, there is significant value out there when you optimize using all of the tools available to you. Value that often significantly outstrips the value of a demand response program. So through the activities of looking at how do we help you control your load, something that Viridity does, and how do you use the market tools that you can get access to with your commodity relationship with Suez as your supplier, how do I put those things together to deliver a window into the wholesale market that allows me to benefit from this environment that we see of rising system-wide offer caps and increased price volatility going forward. So from the outside, the smart grid is a big, scary, complex thing with lots of people chasing it. To the end user, it's a lot more simple than that. We're going to give you, there are tools that have now been developed that give you access to better information about how and when you use electricity and how you can control the way that you use electricity. And it also means access to markets. How do we take that information and turn it into something that lowers your energy price? You can control cost and exposure by integrating demand and supply side. You can use tools to manage load and optimize the value of your assets without additional programs. This isn't about waiting for ERCOT to come out with the next pilot. This is about taking control now. ERCOT's not the answer. You're the answer. Fortunately or unfortunately, as a market participant, you don't have anybody to look to but yourself and the people that you rely on as a customer, and that means your commodity supplier, and it means other people that can help you get the tools that you need.